Grab your popcorn, sweetheart, because apparently everyone loves a good show when they think they're the one writing the script. They watched you struggle, laughed at the wrong moments, underestimated every move, and quietly convinced themselves they already knew how your story would end. Cute. They mistook your silence for weakness, your patience for fear, and your setbacks for the final act. But here's the funny part, you weren't losing the game. You were learning the rules while everyone else was busy celebrating too early. You let them talk. You let them make predictions about what you would never become. Why interrupt a performance when actors are doing such a wonderful job who underestimate themselves? The people who underestimated you usually aren't prepared for the version of you that's off of you, that stops explaining everything. They expect arguments. You give them silence. They expect desperation. You give them discipline. They expect you to chase their approval. You suddenly become far more interested in your own standards. And now they're watching a little closer this time. Because something changed, you stopped reacting to every little provocation. You stopped announcing your plans. You stopped begging people to understand your intentions. You started letting your actions speak. While everyone else kept talking, that's when the atmosphere gets uncomfortable, because people can dismiss your words. Sort of to argue, they can call you arrogant, they can call you lucky, they can say someone helped you, they can invent whatever explanation makes them sleep comfortably at night. They can't erase what you're becoming, and the funniest part is that you don't need revenge, revenge would mean to the control you're enough to control now. Just simple enough. Simple, keep moving, you will build quietly. You considering yourself right, you've been more interested in writing a show. It's like this. I mean, partners and anything moving in the morning. I would know it. Wherever we make it, lovely while it's late. You simple remains in here. While you were quietly changing the entire script, one decision, one boundary, one uncomfortable lesson, and one unexpected move at a time, leaving them sitting there with their popcorn wondering when exactly the person they underestimated became the one thing they couldn't predict anymore. They thought the story was over because they only knew how to judge you by what they could see at the time. You struggled, so they called you weak. You failed, so they called you finished. You went quiet, so they assumed you had nothing left to say. They saw the setback and started celebrating like the credits were already rolling. Adorable. They forgot one tiny detail. A setback is only an ending if you decide to stop there. Sometimes the chapter everyone laughs at becomes the chapter that explains everything that comes afterward. The people who underestimated you don't get to decide when your story is finished. They don't get to put a deadline on your growth. They don't get to look at one bad season and declare the entire future hopeless. You know how many times people have been wrong about someone, simply because they judged too early. They saw the struggle, but never saw the preparation happening underneath it. While they were counting your losses, you were collecting lessons. While they were talking about your mistakes, you were learning how not to repeat them. While they were enjoying the temporary advantage, you were developing patience, discipline, and a thicker skin. That's why you shouldn't panic when people celebrate your setbacks. Let them? Seriously. Let them enjoy the little moment. Let them tell their friends you couldn't do it. Let them assume you've disappeared. Let them underestimate you so completely that your next move becomes impossible for them to predict. You don't need to interrupt their celebration. You don't need to announce your comeback before you've built it. That's the mistake people make when they're desperate to prove everyone wrong. They talk too early. They announce too much. They reveal the plan before the plan has enough strength to survive. You don't need that. Keep your mouth quiet and your standards loud. Work, learn, improve, build, fix what needs fixing, cut what needs cutting. Become so focused on the next level that the opinions of the people watching the old level become background noise. And when the results start appearing, don't waste your energy running back to the people who doubted you demanding an apology. That's another trap. If you spend your success trying to make people regret underestimating you, they're still controlling your attention. Let the results speak without needing to become a courtroom. Let your consistency become the evidence. Let your discipline become the answer. Let your growth make the argument for you. Because the funniest part of being underestimated is that people often stop watching closely. They think they've already figured you out, so they stop paying attention. They don't notice the small changes. They don't notice the new habits. They don't notice that you're thinking differently. They don't notice that you're becoming more patient, more strategic, more selective, more disciplined. Then one day they look again and wonder when everything changed. It didn't change overnight. They simply weren't watching while you were doing the work. That's the punchline. They celebrated the version of you that was struggling, never realizing that struggle was teaching you how to become stronger. They laughed at the chapter that was actually preparing you for the chapter they would have no choice but to notice while you kept moving without asking permission, without announcing every step, and without needing anyone to believe in the future you were quietly building for yourself. They loved the version of you that needed their approval because that version was easy to influence. They knew exactly what to say to make you doubt yourself, exactly when to pull away so you'd chase, exactly how to make you feel like you had something to prove. And you played along for a while. Not because you were stupid, but because you were still learning the difference between being understood and being controlled. Then something changed. You stopped explaining every decision. You stopped defending every accusation. You stopped treating somebody else's opinion like a verdict from the universe. Suddenly, the little buttons they used to press weren't connected anymore, and now they're standing there pushing them like, "Hello? Is this thing broken?" "Yes." "Very broken." Because you finally realized that your reaction is yours. Nobody gets to rent space inside your head just because they know how to annoy you. Nobody gets to decide when you're angry. Nobody gets to decide when you're insecure. Nobody gets to decide whether you spend your entire evening replaying one stupid comment in your mind. That's your territory, and you've finally stopped handing out keys to people who never learned how to respect the place. This doesn't mean you become cold. It means you become selective. You can listen without obeying. You can accept criticism without collapsing. You can hear an insult without turning it into a mission to prove yourself. You can disagree without turning the disagreement into a war. That's a completely different kind of strength because anybody can explode. Anybody can scream. Anybody can send the angry paragraph at 2 in the morning and then spend the next 6 hours wondering why they sent it. Discipline is being able to feel the explosion coming and decide you don't need to participate. That's where your power starts becoming visible. People who were used to controlling your emotions suddenly don't know what to do when you remain calm. They expected you to defend yourself, but you don't. They expected you to chase their approval, but you don't. They expected you to become desperate when they withdrew attention, but instead you became busy building a life that doesn't depend on their attention. Now they're confused. Good. Confusion isn't your responsibility to fix. You don't have to explain why you've changed. You don't have to announce that you're becoming stronger. You don't need to send a speech explaining your new boundaries. Just live them. Let your behavior become the announcement. If you no longer tolerate disrespect, show it by walking away. If you no longer chase approval, show it by making your decisions without begging for permission. If you no longer want unnecessary drama, show it by refusing to participate. The most powerful thing you can do isn't always saying something clever. Sometimes it's refusing to give someone the reaction they desperately wanted. That's when the entire dynamic changes. They can throw the bait, but you don't bite. They can create the argument, but you don't enter it. They can try to pull you backward, but you keep your attention on where you're going. And eventually they realize the person they used to manipulate isn't available anymore. Not because you became heartless, but because you finally learned that your attention is valuable, your emotions are valuable, your peace is valuable, and handing those things to people who only know how to disturb them is a terrible bargain. So while they keep waiting for the old reaction to return, you keep choosing the new version of yourself that doesn't need to react just because somebody else decided to press a button they thought they knew exactly how your story would go. And that's probably the funniest part of the whole thing. People love predicting the future. When they're standing outside your life looking in, they see one failure and suddenly they're experts. They see you struggle for a while and decide they've discovered your permanent identity. They see you go quiet and assume you've lost your strength. Then they start building a little story around you, a story where you're supposed to remain exactly where they left you. Convenient, comfortable, completely wrong, because the moment you decide to stop living according to somebody else's expectations, their entire prediction becomes useless. You don't have to become unpredictable by acting crazy or mysterious. You become unpredictable by growing. You change your habits. You change your standards. You change the people you allow close to you. You change the things you tolerate. You stop explaining your plans before you've built them. You stop announcing every move because you finally understand that not everyone watching you is cheering for you. Some people collect information because they want to know where to criticize next. So you become quieter, not weaker. You stop giving away the blueprint. You let people see the result instead of watching every step of the construction. That's when your transformation becomes difficult to predict. They expect you to respond the way you always did, but you don't. They expect you to chase when they pull away, but you don't. They expect you to argue when they provoke you, but you don't. They expect you to seek approval when they criticize you, but you don't. Suddenly their little script has no actor willing to perform it. And that's where your freedom begins. You realize that being misunderstood isn't an emergency. Someone can have the wrong opinion about you, and your life can still move forward. Someone can doubt you, and you can still succeed. Someone can underestimate you, and you can still become everything they said you couldn't become. You don't have to correct every misunderstanding. You don't have to chase every rumor. You don't have to defend yourself against every ridiculous accusation. Sometimes the best response is simply becoming so focused on your own direction that the noise loses its ability to turn your head. And don't confuse unpredictability with inconsistency. You're not changing your values every 5 minutes. You're becoming more intentional about them. You know what you stand for. You know what you won't tolerate. You know what deserves your attention and what doesn't. That's why people can't easily manipulate the new version of you. They don't know which button to press because you stopped giving them buttons. You learn to pause before reacting. You learn to think before trusting. You learn to observe before judging. You learn that silence can reveal more than confrontation. You learn that time exposes patterns. You learn that actions matter more than promises. So now when someone tries the old strategy, they meet a different response. Not because you're trying to impress them, but because you've genuinely changed. And that's what makes the transformation real. You aren't performing a new personality for an audience. You're building a new life from the inside out. The people who expected you to remain predictable will eventually realize that the person they were watching was only a chapter, not the entire book. And while they keep trying to anticipate your next move based on who you used to be, you're already becoming someone whose next move is determined by purpose, discipline, self-respect, and the future you're building rather than by the expectations of people who were never supposed to control your direction, leaving them with nothing but their old assumptions while you quietly move beyond the version of yourself they thought they had figured out. The funniest thing about people watching your transformation is that they often think your progress is a performance designed for them, as if every improvement you make is some secret revenge plan meant to make them feel small. They want to believe you're waking up every morning thinking about them, checking whether they're watching, wondering whether they finally regret what they said. How flattering. But the truth is much more uncomfortable. You're becoming better because you finally realized your life is too valuable to spend explaining yourself to people who already decided what they wanted to believe. That's when the pressure starts losing its power. They criticize you, and you keep working. They question you, and you keep learning. They doubt your ability, and instead of wasting hours arguing, you quietly improve the ability they doubted. That's the difference between wanting to look strong and actually becoming strong. You don't need to convince the audience that the show is good while you're still building the stage. Let them laugh at the unfinished version. Let them point at the mistakes. Let them discuss the parts that haven't worked yet. They don't have to understand the process because they aren't responsible for completing it. Your responsibility is to keep moving. And here's where people make a mistake. They think pressure automatically means they are being attacked, when sometimes pressure is simply revealing what still needs to be strengthened. If criticism contains something useful, take it. If it doesn't, leave it where you found it. You don't have to swallow every opinion just because someone delivered it loudly. A loud voice isn't automatically a correct voice. Sometimes people criticize what they don't understand because your progress challenges their comfortable assumptions. Sometimes they simply don't like the fact that you're changing. Either way, you don't need to become bitter. Bitterness keeps you connected to the people you claim you have moved beyond. If you spend your entire journey trying to make them suffer, you're still walking in their direction. Turn around. Walk toward your own purpose. That's the real punchline. Not making them jealous. Not humiliating them. Not proving that they were terrible people. The real victory is becoming so committed to your own growth that their reactions stop determining your emotional weather. They can clap or complain. They can watch or ignore. They can understand or misunderstand. Your direction stays the same. That's what makes transformation powerful. It's not about becoming someone nobody can criticize. Good luck with that. Even the moon gets criticized by people who prefer the sun. It's about becoming someone who can hear criticism without losing their identity. Someone who can receive praise without becoming dependent on it. Someone who can fail without deciding they're a failure. Someone who can succeed without needing to rub it into anybody's face. That's maturity wearing confidence like it actually belongs there. And when people finally notice how far you've come, you don't need to run back and remind them of every time they doubted you. You don't need to collect their apologies like trophies. You simply keep going. Because the life you're building has become more interesting than the opinions you used to spend so much time fighting. And while they remain focused on the version of you they remember, you keep becoming the version of yourself they never had enough imagination to predict, turning pressure into discipline, criticism into information, setbacks into experience, and every attempt to reduce you into another reason to rise without needing their permission or their applause. You don't control the final scene by screaming louder than everyone else. You control it by deciding what kind of person you become when nobody is clapping. That's the part people usually miss. They think the final victory is the moment everyone finally admits they were wrong. But honestly, that's a pretty small prize. Imagine spending years building yourself just to turn around and ask, "Did you see me?" That's still asking them for permission to feel successful. No. The real punchline is when you stop needing the audience at all. You stop checking who noticed. You stop wondering who regrets doubting you. You stop measuring your progress by somebody else's reaction. You wake up and realize your life has become too valuable to organize around people who once underestimated you. That's when you actually take control of the final scene. Not by controlling what other people say, but by controlling what you do next. Maybe they expect you to stay angry. You choose peace. Maybe they expect you to become arrogant after succeeding. You choose humility. Maybe they expect you to become obsessed with proving them wrong. You choose to build something bigger than the argument. That's a different kind of victory, because it can't be taken away by somebody changing their opinion. If they suddenly praise you, you keep moving. If they suddenly criticize you again, you keep moving. If they ignore you completely, you keep moving. Your direction doesn't depend on the noise around you. That's what independence looks like when it finally becomes real. You aren't waiting for the world to give you permission to become who you know you can become. You're doing the work because you decided your future deserves your attention more than your past deserves your anger. And yes, people may notice. Some may even become impressed. Others may suddenly act like they always believed in you. That's adorable too. But you don't need to embarrass them for changing their opinion. Let them change it. People are allowed to realize they were wrong. You don't have to make their realization painful. Your job isn't to punish them. Your job is to continue becoming. Keep your standards high. Keep your mind sharp. Keep your promises to yourself. Protect your peace. Choose your circle carefully. Learn from failure without turning failure into an identity. Accept success without turning success into an ego. That's how you become the person who controls the final scene. Not because everything goes your way, but because you decide who you're going to be when it doesn't. That's the part nobody can predict. They can predict your circumstances, maybe. They can remember your old mistakes. They can guess what you'll do based on who you used to be. But they can't control the person you decide to become today. And when you finally understand that, the whole game gets quieter. You stop chasing applause. You stop fighting every critic. You stop trying to convince strangers that your journey is legitimate. You simply keep building. Then one day, you look back and realize the biggest joke wasn't that they underestimated you. The biggest joke was that you once believed their opinion had the power to determine how far you could go. Because the final scene was never supposed to be about them watching you win. It was supposed to be about you becoming so committed to your own purpose that whether they watched, laughed, doubted, applauded, or disappeared completely no longer had the power to decide what happened next in your life.